I'm Christy Pelzel, Senior Correspondent for Today News Africa. And joining me is Dr. Kanayo Nwanze, the 2021 UN Food Systems Summit appointed CGIAR Special Representative to the UN Food Summit. CGIAR stands for Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research Centers. Can you tell us a little bit about what CGIAR does and why it's playing a key role in this year's Food Summit?
CGIAR, as you did mention, Christy, thank you so much again for inviting me for this conversation. The CGIAR, as you rightly indicated, is actually the world's largest publicly funded agriculture research partnership. It's actually a partnership of member states, of countries, of even the private sector, foundations, and research scientists from all over the world. I think it's important that, we put the CGIAR in the perspective of the Food Systems Summit going forward, looking at 2030. CGIAR is 50 years today. Well, in the last, maybe, let me say a couple of years, maybe just less than a couple of years, it's been going through a major transformation to become more integrated, unified governance structure, and also to have regional approach to solving and supporting partners and solving the food systems crisis. And in doing so, it's also there is also an advocacy going ahead, actually going on to increase the level of financing to agricultural research. I'm sure you have this. I don't have the statistics right over. I'm sorry, but if you look at the statistics, you'll find that agricultural research is one of the least funded by governments, national governments across Africa. And most countries depend on international assistance to fund their own national research. And the most vulnerable are in the rural populations. And that is about 75% of the world's population in the developing world. When you get to hear about them, it's when there's a crisis, when there's a war, when there's an earthquake, that's when you have a major famine and then thousands of people are displaced and there's death. But the work of the CGIAR is always there in the front lines.
And I'm glad that you mentioned hunger and poverty. Those two subjects are often tied very closely together. And you're working with all of these partners across all of these sectors, but how do you mitigate the risk of bringing innovation and food resources to conflict regions where safety, even the safety of those trying to deliver food, is at grave risk? And I'm thinking South Sudan, Northern Nigeria, Yemen. How do we realistically help these people? Like, innovation, does it really matter when it's such a dangerous environment that you can't even get in?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I think I saw one of your articles recently where you did mention these conflict areas. Sudan, my country, Nigeria is one of them. And the CGIAR actually is always in the forefront, in the front lines, in the trenches, working with our national partners. And these countries that are basically conflict-driven, they're rife with conflict. That is where the need is greatest when it comes to, insecurity in terms of their livelihoods. And I don't want to restrict myself to just food security because this is a much larger context. We're looking at human health as well. We're looking at the health of the environment. We're looking at putting food on the table. And here I will quickly introduce the terminology food systems, which is what basically I am supporting the CGIAR on. And food systems is everything. It's not only the food itself, how we produce it, how we consume it, how we dispose of it, but also the environment within which it is produced and the people And also it's always a people-centered approach, bringing science, to bear on the ground.
That's really good to know that you're thinking of it from the perspective also not just of innovation and food, but policy perspective, but from the pressure perspective in politics, because these things sometimes play in depending on the region.
Exactly.
Okay, zero hunger talk is just talk. You said that in 2016 for UN News. How do you feel about those words today?
Did I say that?
You said that. And here we are. So how do you feel?
I feel good. Well, I feel good because I think, and I would like to believe, that the 2021 UN Food Systems Summit is addressing that. It's not just talk. I actually did express my concern last year at early stages about whether this summit was going to be another summit of declarations. But apparently I am being proven wrong, and I would love to continue to be proven wrong. Why do I say that? As the Secretary General himself has said, this is a people's summit. If you look at the summits of the past, whether it's 2015 and those before them, it's oftentimes our decision makers, our policy makers are closing in a conference room over X number of weeks, and they come up with a declaration, and member states make commitments. But then where is the ownership? So now you have a summit that is a people's summit, where everybody, producers, consumers, transformers, and those who sell and whatever, and those who dispose of whatever it is. So you have youth who are our future, they are tomorrow. They have a voice. You have farmers themselves. You have activists. You have government representatives. You have scientists and researchers. You have writers, you name it. So we want to get as many voices on the table and to listen to basically, we want to come out with not just plans, but actionable plans that to be owned by people themselves, by nations and by regions and by individuals, and everyone contributing their little bit. So everything is going to be on the table. And I think this is essentially the difference. So we're not just going to be talking, we're going to be putting together the elements for action that must also carry with them a degree of responsibility and accountability, because everyone's voice has been heard, has been taken into consideration. This is a difference here.
It's the People's Summit. I love that. So what would need to happen at the summit this year for you personally to categorize this as a big success?
Well, first of all, I would say, if we had a couple billion people participating at this summit, and I use that, couple billion. Now, that's in itself is a movement, it's a force. If you have a billion people, a couple of billion, 2 billion people actually beginning to understand what we mean by food systems. It's not just food security about feeding somebody. It is, we begin to understand how it works. We see food not just as food, but as an integral part of our livelihoods. And this affects, as I said earlier, not just our stomachs, but also has impact on land, on water, on the environment, on people, and livelihoods. So we're looking at a more holistic approach to livelihoods. And this, for me, is a major step, because hopefully it will bring about a change in mindset on the way we look at what has been entrusted to us as human beings. We are the custodians of nature. And if we don't look at food and food systems as an integral part of nature, we bring about a dislocation, which is what we've experienced. And so you see, when we talk about environment, the climate crisis becomes an integral part of food systems. the health issues. COVID, fortunately or unfortunately, brings home the reality of the fact that you cannot dissociate health from food. And countries that are very badly affected by COVID, particularly in the developing world, already have their food systems broken. So you have a health crisis, you have a food crisis, you have a systems crisis. And this is, I think, for me, I see this as elements of success going forward with the summit. And if we're able to achieve that, I think we have we've taken a major step.
And I now see how your unique perspective at CGIAR kind of brings something special to the UN, because you're also thinking about health. You work with health partners and you work with agriculture and food partners. So you can bring that lens, you can bring those different lenses together to help people understand how you have to have those two things together to make it work for long periods. And I also like what you said about if billions of people joined in, because it's going to take a mass majority. And I love what you said also about mindset shift. I think the more people and the more mindset shift we have, those two things combined, the closer we can get to the zero hunger. And so I think alongside the UN, what the UN is doing, other individual countries need to keep addressing issues with their partner countries. And I just read this, and I'm a little bit late, but I just read this in the news because I'm on the pulse of what's happening in Nigeria, because that's one of my main countries that I follow. And
yes,
I heard that US Aid is having a COVID-19 food security challenge. It ends in May, but they're offering $25,000 to $150,000 to Nigerian-led youth companies, agricultural or food companies. Have you heard of this?
No, I heard about it, but not to an extent that I understood what it was about. But I do know that the USA has been involved in Nigeria for years, supporting agriculture and other development-related aspects. So I wouldn't be surprised that they are doing this. And particularly, as you just mentioned, this is focusing on youth. I also run a facility which I call FIRE, the Facility for Youth Development, which also focuses on providing mini grants and mentorship to rural youths in rural areas. So this focus on youth, as I said earlier, they are the future. And I think if we don't handle it correctly, this great potential that we have in our youth could become something else, become a detriment. And when you have restive youth, where there's massive unemployment and dissatisfaction, we have a problem. It's like sitting on a powder keg. So I'm really delighted about what you're saying about USAID and other development partners, of course, who are focusing more and more on youth empowerment. The UN Food System Summit also gives us an opportunity, occasions like this, working with partners, for the CGI to be seen as a foundational element to achieving a balanced natural food systems in the world.
Very well said. Very well said. Thank you so much for your time today.
I thank you too very much, Christy.